I never thought the end of my engagement would begin with applause from strangers who were not clapping for me, but for the spectacle they thought they were about to witness. "The wedding is off. I don't love you anymore." Ethan said it loudly enough that the entire Italian bistro went silent. Forks paused mid-air. Conversations died in half-sentences. I felt dozens of eyes turn toward our table by the window, the one he specifically requested when we arrived. "My name is Lauren Mitchell. I am 28 years old." And in that moment, sitting across from the man I had spent 4 years building a life around, something inside me didn't shatter. It locked into place. That was the hook. Not the words he said, but the realization that this moment had been planned long before I ever sat down. Ethan was watching my face closely, not with sadness, not even guilt, but with something else, anticipation, like a director waiting for an actor to hit their mark. His friends, Mark, Daniel, and Lucas, were seated just a few feet away, at another table, pretending not to stare, while staring anyway. They had been invited for what Ethan called a casual weekend lunch. I should have known. Ethan never did anything without an audience. I sat there for a second, my fork hovering over my plate of chicken parmesan, while the words echoed in my head. "The wedding is off. I don't love you anymore." He wanted tears. He wanted shock. He wanted me to break in public so he could look calm and justified in comparison. Instead, I set my fork down gently. "Thank you for being honest," I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. His eyebrows lifted just slightly. That was not the reaction he expected. I reached for my left hand and slowly removed the engagement ring. The same ring he had proposed with 2 years earlier, at his parents' anniversary dinner, in front of nearly 200 people. Back then I thought it was romantic. Looking back, I see the pattern. He didn't propose to me. He performed the proposal. I slipped the ring into my jacket pocket and took a slow breath. "You know what," I said calmly. "I think I'm going to throw a narrow escape party." One of his friends laughed. Another snorted into his drink. Ethan smirked, clearly enjoying the confusion. He thought I was in denial, that I didn't understand what was happening, but I understood perfectly. I realized right then that this lunch had never been about honesty. It was about control. Ethan had chosen this restaurant, this time, this table, these witnesses. He wanted to humiliate me carefully, publicly, and with documentation. "Lauren," he said, his voice tightening. "Did you hear what I said?" "I heard you perfectly," I replied. "You don't love me anymore. The wedding is off. I believe I already thanked you for your honesty." The smile on his face flickered. I pulled my wallet from my purse, placed enough cash on the table to cover my meal, and added a generous tip for the server, who was trying very hard not to stare. "I have to say, Ethan," I added, standing up and gathering my things, "you picked quite a setting for this announcement. A crowded restaurant on a Saturday afternoon. Your friends conveniently nearby. Very theatrical." His face reddened slightly. "I thought you deserved the truth," he said. "And I got it," I answered. "More truth than you probably intended." I glanced at his friends, who suddenly looked uncomfortable now that the scene wasn't going the way they expected. "Gentlemen," I said politely, "thank you for being here today. Your presence has been illuminating." Then I walked out. Every step toward the exit felt heavy, not with shame, but with clarity. I wasn't embarrassed. I wasn't broken. I was awake. 4 years of my life clicked into focus in that single moment. Outside, the cold air hit my face, and I took a deep breath. My hands weren't shaking. My eyes were dry. I walked to my car, unlocked it, and sat behind the wheel. Only then alone did I allow myself to feel the weight of what had just happened. But it wasn't devastation that washed over me. It was recognition. I had just watched Ethan reveal exactly who he was, not in anger, not in a moment of weakness, but deliberately, carefully, with witnesses. My phone buzzed. A text from my best friend Rachel. "How was lunch?" I stared at the screen for a second, then typed back. "Wedding is cancelled. I will explain later. But I'm okay. Actually, I think I'm better than okay." As I pulled out of the parking lot, I glanced back through the restaurant window. Ethan was still sitting there, surrounded by his friends, probably telling them I was in shock that I hadn't processed it yet. He had no idea what was actually happening. He thought he had just ended me. What he didn't know was that he had just handed me the key to a door I didn't even realize had been locked. And if you're wondering why I didn't cry, why I didn't beg, why I didn't fall apart in front of everyone, that's the part of this story you haven't heard yet, because that lunch wasn't the end. It was the moment I stopped shrinking. I thought the hardest part would be walking out of that restaurant without breaking down. I was wrong. The hardest part came afterward when I realized something even more unsettling. I wasn't reacting the way I always had. The drive home felt unreal, like I was floating just above my own life, watching it happen from a distance. Traffic lights changed, cars passed. My hands stayed steady on the steering wheel. I kept waiting for the tears to come, for the panic, for the shaking, for the feeling that my world had collapsed. It never came. And that terrified me more than if it had, because for 4 years my reactions had been predictable. Ethan would criticize and I would explain. He would dismiss and I would soften. He would pull away and I would reach closer. I had learned to perform a very specific role in our relationship, the understanding one, the flexible one, the woman who never made things difficult. But at that restaurant I had stepped off script, and now I could feel the aftershock of that choice rippling outward. My phone buzzed again at a red light. Ethan. That wasn't the reaction I expected. Are you okay? You seemed kind of out of it. I stared at the message until the light turned green, then placed the phone face down on the passenger seat. I didn't respond. That was the hook. The silence. For the first time since I met him, I wasn't rushing to manage his discomfort. I wasn't trying to reassure him, smooth things over, or explain myself. I wasn't trying to make him feel in control. I was just driving home. By the time I reached my apartment complex, my phone had buzzed 3 more times, each message sharper than the last. We should talk. This isn't like you. Don't do this. Don't do what? Refuse to play my part. I parked my car and sat there for a long moment, staring at the steering wheel. Memories started surfacing, not as a blur but as a pattern finally visible now that I had stepped back. The first time I noticed, it had been small. A joke at a dinner party where Ethan corrected my pronunciation in front of his colleagues. Everyone laughed, including me, because I thought that was what I was supposed to do. Later that night he told me I was too sensitive for feeling embarrassed. Another time he surprised me with an expensive weekend trip, then reminded me the entire drive there how much it cost. When I suggested a cheaper restaurant, he smiled and said, "Let me handle it, you don't need to worry about money." What he really meant was, "You don't get a vote." I carried my purse upstairs, unlocked my apartment, and stepped inside. The quiet felt strange. This place had always been temporary in my mind, something I would leave once we were married. I had decorated it carefully, neutrally, so Ethan would approve when he visited. I dropped my keys on the counter and laughed softly at the realization. Even my home had been waiting for permission. My phone buzzed again. "Ethan, I think you're in shock. Call me when you're ready to be rational." That word hit harder than the breakup itself. Rational. Because that was the label he used whenever I disagreed with him. When I questioned his decisions. When I asked for space, or time, or compromise. Rational meant aligned with him. Emotional meant anything else. I didn't answer. Instead, I sat on the edge of my couch and let the quiet settle. And in that quiet, something unexpected happened. I didn't feel abandoned. I felt clear. Clear enough to see the moment in the restaurant again from the outside. The way Ethan had projected his voice just enough to draw attention. The way his friends had been positioned close enough to watch, but far enough to pretend they weren't involved. The way his expression shifted when I didn't cry. He hadn't just wanted to end things, he had wanted a scene. The realization made my stomach tighten. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Ethan. "Rachel," I answered, before I could overthink it. "I'm coming over," she said immediately. "Don't argue." I didn't. While I waited, I replayed the moment he said the words again and again. "The wedding is off. I don't love you anymore." What struck me now wasn't the cruelty of the statement but the timing. He had waited until we were seated, until the food arrived, until his friends were present. He had waited until escape would be awkward and public. It wasn't honesty. It was theater. When Rachel arrived, she took one look at my face and stopped short. "You're calm," she said carefully. I nodded. "That scares me," she admitted. "It scares me too," I said. We sat together on the couch as I told her everything, the restaurant, the words, the laughter from his friends, the moment I removed the ring. When I repeated what I had said about the narrow escape party, she stared at me for a long second, then smiled slowly. "Do you know what you did?" she asked. I shook my head. "You took control of the narrative before he could," she said. "And men like Ethan do not handle that well." As if summoned, my phone buzzed again. "Ethan. People are asking me what happened. You need to help me explain this." I felt something shift inside me then, not anger, not sadness, but resolve. I didn't owe him an explanation. I didn't owe him closure. I didn't owe him my reaction. And for the first time, I understood something with absolute certainty. My calm wasn't shock. It was clarity arriving faster than expected. What Ethan thought was the beginning of my collapse was actually the moment I stopped shrinking, and he had no idea what that would cost him yet. The morning after the breakup, I woke up before my alarm with a strange feeling in my chest. Not panic, not grief. Something quieter. It took me a moment to recognize it. Relief. That realization became the hook that scared me more than anything else, because people who lose the love of their life do not wake up feeling relieved. I lay there staring at the ceiling of my apartment, listening to the hum of traffic outside, and for the first time in years my mind was completely still. No rehearsing conversations, no anticipating Ethan's moods, no mentally adjusting my plans to fit someone else's expectations. Just silence. And in that silence, memories began lining up neatly, like evidence finally willing to be examined. I thought about the first year with Ethan, how confident he had seemed, how charming, how focused. When we met, I was 24, fresh out of college working as an event coordinator downtown. I had dreams then, real ones, not the vague, polished kind Ethan liked to talk about, but messy, ambitious dreams of starting my own business. Ethan had listened intently on our first few dates, nodding, asking questions, smiling at all the right moments. Back then, I thought he was interested. Now I see he was taking notes. By our second year together, small adjustments had started to feel normal. He didn't like my college friends, said they were immature, so I saw them less. He thought my apartment was too far from his office, so I moved closer to his side of town. He said starting a business was risky, that I should build stability first, so I put my plans on hold. Each decision made sense on its own. Together they formed a pattern. I sat up in bed and laughed softly at the thought. I had called it compromise. The hook hit again. What if it never was? I walked into the kitchen, poured coffee, and leaned against the counter while my phone buzzed on the table. Another message from Ethan. Good morning. We need to talk about yesterday. I didn't open it. Instead, I remembered my mother asking me a question last Christmas. We had been alone in the kitchen while Ethan took a call outside. She looked at me the way only a mother can, eyes sharp with concern. Lauren, she had said, does Ethan make you happy? Really happy. I had smiled immediately, too quickly. Of course, Mom, we're getting married. But happy wasn't the word. Comfortable, maybe. Invested, definitely. Afraid to start over, absolutely. I took my coffee into the living room and sat on the couch where Rachel and I had talked the night before. Her words echoed in my head. You took control of the narrative before he could. The more I thought about it, the clearer something became. Ethan had always controlled the story. Not just with other people, but with me. Whenever I disagreed with him, he framed it as me being emotional. Whenever I pushed back, he framed it as me being difficult. Whenever I asked for more, he framed it as me being unrealistic. And eventually I had started telling his version of the story for him. I caught myself defending him to friends. Has just stressed. He didn't mean it that way. You don't know him like I do. That realization landed hard. I had been editing my own life to protect his image. My phone buzzed again. Ethan, this silent treatment is immature. Call me. I placed the phone face down and stood up, pacing the room. The hook pulled tighter. Why wasn't I afraid to lose him? Because somewhere along the way I had already lost myself. I thought about the engagement, how he had proposed at his parents' anniversary party in front of hundreds of people, cameras flashing, applause filling the room. At the time I thought it was romantic. Now I see it for what it was. A performance. He didn't ask if I wanted a private moment. He didn't ask how I imagined it. He chose the setting, the audience, the timing. Saying no would have meant humiliation. So I said yes. That was when the pattern should have been obvious. I opened my laptop and started scrolling through old photos. Not the posed couple shots, the candid ones. Slowly I watched my own expression change over the years, my smile becoming smaller, my posture tighter, my eyes less sure. The woman staring back at me didn't look heartbroken, she looked exhausted. Another hook hit. What if the breakup wasn't the trauma? What if the relationship was? My phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't Ethan. Rachel, you okay? I typed back slowly, choosing my words carefully. I think I'm seeing things clearly for the first time. Her reply came almost immediately. That usually happens after the fog lifts. Fog. That was the word. Ethan had been the fog. Not loud, not obvious, but constant. a low-pressure system that slowly changed the climate of my life until I couldn't remember what clear weather felt like. I sat back down and let the truth settle. Walking out of that restaurant wasn't just leaving a man. It was leaving a role I had been playing for years, the agreeable fiancé, the flexible partner, the woman who never asked for too much. And now, that role was gone. The silence in my apartment felt different now. Not empty, open. Ethan thought the public breakup would make him look strong and me look unstable. What he didn't realize was that the moment he ended things publicly, he gave me distance. And distance gave me perspective. Perspective gave me power. I picked up my phone and typed one message, then deleted it. Not to him, but to myself. Do not go back. Because this was only the beginning. And I could feel it. We've poured a lot of time and heart into creating this story. If you don't like it, give it a like anyway, and if you do enjoy it, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Now, let's get back to the story. By the third day, the silence stopped feeling peaceful and started feeling powerful. That was when I realized something had shifted on the other side too. Ethan was panicking. At first the messages had been soft, almost concerned. Are you okay? You seemed off, let's talk. Then, they turned sharp. This is immature. You're overreacting. By day 3 they became something else entirely. People are asking me questions. You need to help me explain this. You're making me look bad. That was the hook. Not the messages themselves but what they revealed. He didn't miss me. He missed control. I was making coffee when my phone buzzed again. I didn't pick it up right away. I had learned something important in the last 48 hours. When I slowed down and didn't react, Ethan filled the silence himself. And what he filled it with told me everything. I finally looked at the screen. This isn't how mature adults handle things. We need to present a united front. United front. I laughed quietly, standing alone in my kitchen. For 4 years I had been the united front. I had smoothed his rough edges, edited his tone, explained away his behavior. I had protected his image, even when it cost me my voice. And now that I wasn't doing that anymore, the cracks were showing fast. Rachel called me that afternoon. Her voice was cautious, but curious. You might want to sit down, she said. I already was. I just heard something through a coworker who knows one of Ethan's friends. Apparently he's telling people you're not taking the breakup well, that you're in shock and acting unstable. There it was. The narrative. My stomach tightened, not with fear but recognition. Of course he was. He had always needed to be the reasonable one, the calm one, the victim of someone else's emotions. That was why the restaurant mattered. That was why the witnesses mattered. I closed my eyes and replayed the scene again. His volume, the timing, his friends nearby watching, waiting. He had wanted proof. Proof that I was too much, too emotional, too unstable to marry. But he didn't get it. And now he was scrambling to recreate it with words. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because I was heartbroken, but because my mind wouldn't stop connecting dots. Little moments I had brushed off before now lined up into something undeniable. The way he would criticize me privately, then praise me publicly so no one would believe me if I complained. The way he made decisions first, then asked for my agreement later. The way he framed my discomfort as insecurity. He had been training people to see me a certain way long before he ended things. And that realization hit like cold water. This breakup wasn't sudden. It was staged. The next morning I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I stopped asking what Ethan wanted. I started asking what I wanted. And the answer came quickly. I wanted space. I wanted clarity. I wanted my life back. I didn't respond to his messages. I didn't post anything online. I didn't explain myself to mutual friends. I let the quiet speak. By day 4 the messages changed tone again. I didn't mean to hurt you. I did this because I care about you. We can still be friends. Friends. That word used to pull me back every time. It was always offered when I pulled away, as if proximity without commitment was a favor. This time it landed differently. I realized something important. Ethan wasn't adjusting because he was sorry. He was adjusting because his first plan had failed. And that meant there was probably more I didn't know yet. That was when I started paying attention not to what he said but to what he did. And what he did was try to manage other people's perceptions before I could. That alone told me the truth was dangerous to him. Rachel came over that evening with takeout, and the kind of look that meant she was holding something back. Say it, I told her. She hesitated. One of Ethan's girlfriends reached out to someone I know. Apparently, Ethan told them he had to end things publicly, because he was afraid of how you'd react in private. I felt my chest tighten. Afraid of me? She nodded. He told them you were emotionally volatile, that he needed witnesses. The hook dropped hard. That was the story he was building. Suddenly, everything made sense. The public setting, the recording phones, the audience. He wasn't just ending the relationship. He was protecting himself in advance. I sat very still as the truth settled. He had been setting the stage long before the curtain rose. Rachel watched my face carefully. "Are you okay?" she asked. I nodded slowly. I think I finally understand what I was dealing with. And I did. Ethan didn't want to leave quietly. He wanted to leave clean, with witnesses, with justification, with proof that he was the good guy escaping a difficult situation. What he didn't plan for was my calm. Because calm doesn't fit a meltdown narrative. Silence doesn't support instability. Dignity ruins a good story. And now that his version wasn't lining up with my behavior, he was unraveling. I looked at Rachel and felt something new settle in my chest. Not anger, not revenge. Resolve. I wasn't going to chase his version of events. I wasn't going to defend myself loudly. I was going to let the truth surface the way it always does, quietly and on its own timeline. If you've ever watched someone panic because you stopped reacting, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And if this part of the story feels familiar to you, if you've ever been painted as the problem, the moment you stopped shrinking, leave a comment and just type, "I see it." Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop playing the role they wrote for you. By the 5th day, I stopped counting how long Ethan had been texting me and started paying attention to how he was doing it. That became the hook. Because the messages weren't random. They were escalating. At first, they had been about concern, then about control. Now they were about panic. I woke up to 7 missed notifications, all from him, sent between midnight and 6 a.m. I didn't open them right away. I already knew the pattern. When Ethan felt control slipping, he talked faster, wrote longer, and contradicted himself without realizing it. I made coffee, sat by the window, let the phone vibrate one more time. Then I read them. "I didn't do this to hurt you. You're twisting things. People are misunderstanding me. You need to talk to me before this gets worse." Worse. That word stuck with me, because nothing had actually happened yet. I hadn't posted. I hadn't spoken publicly. I hadn't defended myself or accused him of anything. And still, he was afraid. That was the hook that pulled me forward. What exactly was he afraid of if I stayed silent? I decided it was time to untangle the practical things. The parts of our life that still overlapped. The wedding had been scheduled for 6 months later. Deposits paid, vendors booked, documents shared. I opened my laptop and logged into the shared planning folder. That's when my stomach dropped. There was a document I had never seen before, titled Priority Notifications. I clicked it. 40 names. Ethan's friends, his coworkers, a few distant relatives, people I barely knew. Next to each name was a note. Wedding update. Send immediately. My pulse slowed in a way that felt unnatural, calm but sharp. I checked the document history, created 2 weeks before the lunch. 2 weeks, that was the hook. The breakup hadn't been spontaneous. It had been scheduled. I clicked through more files, and then I found it. A drafted message, never sent. As some of you witnessed today, I made the difficult decision to end my engagement to Lauren. This was not easy, but I realized I could not commit to a future with someone whose values and goals no longer aligned with mine. The words were clean, controlled, heroic, and suddenly I could see it all. The witnesses, the public setting, the calm breakup announcement ready to go. He had planned the ending before I ever sat down at that table. My phone buzzed again. "Ethan, have you been telling people things? Someone said you're acting like this is a celebration." I stared at the message and felt something inside me settle. Not anger, not shock, understanding. I wasn't dealing with a man who ended a relationship. I was dealing with a man who had launched a campaign. I kept digging. Messages between him and his friends from the morning of the lunch. "Today is the day. Meet at the bistro at 12:30. I want you there." One reply stood out. "Finally been waiting for this. I'll record everything." Record. My hands went cold. That's when the pieces locked together. The reason he wanted witnesses wasn't support. It was evidence. Evidence of my breakdown. Evidence of instability. Evidence to justify the story he had been telling behind my back. And I hadn't given him any. My phone buzzed again. Why won't you answer? This silence is manipulative. I laughed quietly at that. Silence wasn't manipulative when I did it. It was only manipulative when it wasn't his. That afternoon Rachel came over again. I showed her the files, the messages, the timeline. She went quiet in the way people do when they realize something darker than expected. He planned this, she said finally. I nodded. And he thought you'd fall apart. I nodded again. And when you didn't, everything broke. That was it. Ethan hadn't misjudged my emotions. He had misjudged my strength. And now he was scrambling to regain control of a story that no longer belonged to him. That night I received one more message. Longer than the rest. I don't understand why you're doing this. We could have handled this privately. You're making things harder than they need to be. Privately. That word landed differently now. If he wanted private, he would have chosen it. What he wanted was safe. What he wanted was clean. And I was no longer cooperating. I closed my laptop and leaned back on the couch, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Confidence. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just steady. I didn't need to expose him yet. I didn't need to explain myself. All I had to do was keep letting him reveal himself. And if you're listening to this story, and you can already feel the shift, that moment when you realize the silence is driving them crazy, tap like on this video, because the next part is where the truth starts coming out, whether he's ready for it or not. I thought I had reached the bottom of the truth. I was wrong. The real hook came when I found the one thing Ethan never expected me to look for: her name. I was sitting at my dining table late that night, my laptop still open to the shared accounts I had not yet closed. I was not searching anymore. I was reviewing. That was the difference. Searching is emotional. Reviewing is clinical. And that is when I noticed the phone records. We had shared a family plan. Another detail Ethan insisted on because it was easier, more efficient, his favorite words. I had never questioned it. Why would I? I trusted him. Until that night. At first it looked normal. Calls to coworkers, missed calls to his mother, group texts to friends. Then a pattern emerged. One number appeared again and again. Late nights, early mornings, weekends when he told me he was traveling for work. My stomach tightened, not with jealousy, but with recognition. This was not new. This was routine. I clicked deeper. The calls started short back in early summer, just a few minutes at a time. Then, they grew longer, more frequent, sometimes back to back, sometimes lasting over an hour. 5 months, that was the hook. 5 months before he ended things publicly, Ethan had already started something else privately. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of that realization settle slowly. He did not leave me and then move on. He moved on and then staged his exit. That distinction mattered, because it explained everything: the sudden coldness, the impatience, the way he stopped listening but kept watching. He had been halfway gone while still standing in front of me. I texted Rachel one word: "Found something." She called immediately. "Tell me," she said. I explained the calls, the timeline, the pattern. There was silence on the other end for a long moment. "Do you know who she is?" Rachel finally asked. "Not yet," I said, "but I think I am about to." It did not take long. I searched the number through our shared contacts, then through social media, then through the messages stored in our cloud backups, and there she was. Alyssa Turner. Her name appeared in a draft message Ethan had never sent, dated the night before the lunch. "Tomorrow, I am ending things with Lauren. I know you have been patient. I cannot wait to be free and start our next chapter." I read it 3 times. Patient. Next chapter. Those words told me everything I needed to know. The breakup was not an ending. It was a handoff. And suddenly, the public nature of it made sense in a way that made my skin crawl. He needed to look justified. He needed to look like the good guy. He needed to look like someone escaping a difficult situation, not someone abandoning one woman for another. That was why the restaurant mattered. That was why the witnesses mattered. And that was why he needed me to fall apart. Rachel arrived at my apartment less than an hour later. I showed her everything: the records, the messages, the dates. She sat quietly for a long time, then looked up at me with something between anger and awe. "He didn't just cheat," she said. "He planned the optics." "Yes," I replied. And when I didn't give him the reaction he wanted, he lost control of the story. We sat there letting that sink in. I felt something unexpected then. Not humiliation. Not heartbreak. Detachment. For the first time since this began, I saw Ethan clearly not as the man I loved, or even the man who hurt me, but as the man who miscalculated. He underestimated one thing: me. My phone buzzed again. Ethan, I heard you were digging into things. This is crossing a line. Crossing a line. That was the hook that made me laugh out loud. He had crossed every line quietly for months, but the moment I started seeing clearly, he wanted boundaries. I typed a response, then deleted it. I was done explaining myself to someone who had rehearsed my downfall. What struck me most was not that he had cheated. Painful as that was, it was predictable. What struck me was the planning, the coordination, the narrative control, the willingness to humiliate me publicly, so he could transition cleanly into a new life. That was not love. That was strategy. And suddenly, I understood why my calm unsettled him so deeply. Because calm people ask questions. Calm people notice patterns. Calm people do not make good villains. I closed my laptop and felt the weight lift slightly from my chest. I finally knew what I was dealing with. This was no longer about heartbreak. This was about truth. And truth has a way of surfacing whether people want it to or not. Before I went to bed that night, I wrote one sentence in my notes app. He planned the ending. I get to decide what comes next. And if you are listening to this story and thinking about your own past relationships, if you are wondering whether some breakups really are accidents, or if they were written long before they happened, I want to hear your thoughts. Do you think what Ethan did was calculated or cowardly, or both? Drop your opinion in the comments, because this story is only getting deeper, and the conversation matters just as much as the ending. The idea came to me in the quietest moment, which is usually how the most dangerous ideas arrive. I was standing in my kitchen staring at the half-packed box of wedding folders when it hit me. Not anger, not revenge, clarity. That was the hook, because for the first time since Ethan ended things, I was no longer reacting to what he had done. I was deciding what I would do next. The folders were labeled with our future: venue, catering, photography, guest list, all carefully planned, all already paid for. All sitting there like evidence of a life that was supposed to happen. I opened the venue contract again. I had read it dozens of times before. This time I noticed something different. The deposit was non-refundable, but it was transferable. I could use it for any event. That was when the phrase he had laughed at in the restaurant came back to me. A narrow escape party. At the time, it had been instinct, a reflex, something inside me refusing to collapse on cue. Now it felt like strategy. Not a party to mock him, not a party to expose him, a party to reclaim the narrative before he finished writing it without me. Because I knew something important by then. Ethan was already telling his version of the story, quietly, selectively, carefully, and silence alone would not stop that. I called the venue the next morning. The coordinator recognized my name immediately. Of course she did. We had spoken almost weekly for months. When I explained that the wedding was canceled, there was a pause on the line. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said gently. "Thank you," I replied. "But I wanted to ask you something. Is the deposit usable for another event?" "Yes," she said slowly. "It is. What did you have in mind?" I looked out the window at the city below my apartment and felt something solid settle into place. "A celebration," I said, "of new beginnings." She hesitated for half a second, then smiled through the phone. "I can make that work." By the time I hung up, I felt lighter than I had in days. This wasn't about revenge. This was about reframing. If Ethan wanted witnesses so badly, then fine. They would see the full picture. I didn't rush to announce anything. I planned quietly, intentionally. I called the caterer next, then the photographer, then the florist. Each conversation went the same way: sympathy, understanding. Then, something unexpected. Honestly, one of them said, "I always wondered if you were okay. You seemed so stressed every time you came in." That comment stayed with me. How many people had seen me shrinking without saying anything? How many had noticed and assumed this was just how love looked? By the end of the day, I had a date, 3 weeks out, soon enough that the story was still fresh, far enough that I could prepare. I started drafting the invitation that night. It was simple, no drama, no mention of Ethan. "You are invited to celebrate a new beginning with Lauren. Join me as I close one chapter and step fully into the next." That was it. No explanations, no accusations. The hook wasn't in the words. It was in the timing. Rachel read it over my shoulder and smiled slowly. "This is going to drive him crazy," she said. I nodded, because he couldn't control it. I sent the invitations quietly to my people, my real friends, my family, colleagues who had known me before I became careful and quiet. But I also knew something else would happen. Word would travel. It always does. 2 days later, Rachel called me laughing. "You didn't tell me you wanted this to be mysterious," she said. "What do you mean?" Ethan's circle is buzzing. No one knows what the party is about. Some think it's a meltdown, others think it's a power move. I smiled. Let them wonder. That was the hook now. Curiosity. Because curiosity invites attention, and attention invites comparison. And comparison is where truth lives. Ethan texted me that night for the first time in hours. "I heard you're planning something. I think this is a bad idea." I stared at the message for a long moment, then set the phone down without replying. He wasn't afraid of the party. He was afraid of what people might notice. Over the next week I watched it unfold quietly. His friends stopped responding to him as quickly. A coworker I barely knew messaged me asking if I was okay. His sister sent a cautious text checking in. The narrative he had tried to build was cracking under its own weight. Because I wasn't behaving the way he said I would. I wasn't unstable. I wasn't spiraling. I wasn't begging. I was hosting a party. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same venue meant to celebrate my submission to a future he controlled would now celebrate my return to myself. And I didn't need to shout to make that clear. I just needed to stand there. If you've ever realized that the best response isn't explaining yourself but living well, if you've ever felt that moment when you stop defending and start deciding, stay with me, because the next part of this story is where the room fills up, and the truth walks in quietly, whether Ethan is ready to face it or not. Thank you for staying with us this far. If you're busy or need to step away right now, hit subscribe or hit like so you can easily find this video again later. Now, let's get back to the story. The night of the party arrived quietly. No thunder, no drama, and that was the hook. Because the truth rarely enters a room shouting. It walks in calmly and waits to be noticed. I arrived early, standing alone in the venue that was once meant to host my wedding reception. The lights were warm now, not soft and romantic like before but bold, intentional. The colors were mine. Deep tones, clean lines. Nothing chosen to impress anyone but myself. As I walked through the space, I felt a strange sense of symmetry. The same walls, the same floor, the same room where I had once imagined myself shrinking into someone else's future. Tonight it would witness something else entirely. The first guests arrived just after 7. Rachel, of course. Then my mother. Then friends I hadn't seen in years. People who hugged me tightly and said things like, "You look different in the best way," or "I was worried about you but now I get it." And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the room filled. What surprised me wasn't who came. It was who talked. The questions started softly. "So what really happened? How are you holding up? Was it as bad as people say?" I didn't launch into explanations. I didn't rehearse speeches. I answered the way I had promised myself I would. Calmly, factually, only when asked. "He ended things publicly at a restaurant," I said. "His friends were there because he invited them." I later discovered he had planned it in advance. I didn't add emotion. I didn't add adjectives. I didn't need to. People listened differently when there was no anger in the room. The hook revealed itself then. When you speak without trying to convince anyone, people convince themselves. By 8:30, the energy had shifted. Groups formed, conversations lowered, phones appeared, but not in the way Ethan had wanted weeks earlier. Not to capture a breakdown, but to compare stories. To confirm timelines. To ask quiet questions. I watched it happen without interference. A woman I recognized from that lunch approached me. Kevin's wife, Jennifer. She looked uncomfortable, twisting her hands together. "I owe you an apology," she said. I waited. "When Ethan told us what he was planning," she continued, "he framed it like an intervention. He said he was afraid of you, afraid of how you'd react. We thought we were helping him escape something unhealthy." She swallowed hard. "I didn't know about the recording. I didn't know about the other woman." The room seemed to tilt slightly then settle. "Thank you for telling me," I said quietly. "That was all." She nodded, eyes shining with shame and relief, then stepped back into the crowd. And that was how it spread. Not as gossip, not as spectacle, but as realization. People compared the woman Ethan had described with the one standing in front of them, calm, grounded, hosting her own event. answering questions without defensiveness. The math didn't add up. That was the hook now. Contrast. Around 9, I noticed a shift near the entrance. Conversations paused. Heads turned. I didn't have to look to know. Ethan had arrived. He stood just inside the doorway, scanning the room, jaw tight, eyes sharp, like he was searching for something he had lost. Control. He made his way toward me, quickly ignoring the looks that followed him. "Lauren," he said, his voice low, tense. "What do you think you're doing?" I turned to face him fully. "I'm hosting a party," I said evenly. "You are not invited." "You're trying to destroy me," he hissed. "You're telling people lies." "I haven't told anyone anything that isn't true," I replied. "And I've shown no one anything you didn't create yourself." His face flushed. "This is exactly what I told everyone," he snapped. "This instability, this vindictiveness." I held up my hand gently. "Ethan, look around," I said. "Look at the people here. Do I look unstable to you?" He looked, and what he saw finally was a room no longer leaning toward him, faces that had watched him too closely tonight, people who had listened, people who had connected dots without my help. "You planned my public humiliation," I continued calmly. "You had witnesses ready, you had messages drafted, you were already in another relationship. All of this is documented." Someone nearby inhaled sharply. "You don't understand," he started. "I understand perfectly," I said. "You wanted me to break, so you could be justified. When I didn't, you lost the story." The silence that followed was heavy, complete. Ethan looked around once more, then turned and walked out. The room exhaled. The party continued, but something fundamental had changed. Not celebration, clarity. People approached me throughout the rest of the night. Some apologized. Some thanked me. Some simply hugged me and said, "I see it now." I didn't feel victorious. I felt peaceful. The truth had done its work without being forced. By midnight, the music softened. Guests drifted out. Rachel stood beside me, watching the emptying room. "You know," she said, "he thought this was going to be your breakdown." I smiled softly. It was my breakthrough. And if you've been listening to this part of the story, feeling your chest tighten, recognizing moments you've lived yourself, stay with me, because what happened after that night changed everything for him, and finally set me free. I thought the hardest part was over when Ethan walked out of that room. I was wrong again. The hook came the next morning, when my phone started buzzing non-stop, before I even finished my coffee. Not from him. From everyone else. That was when I realized the confrontation hadn't ended the story. It had activated it. Messages came in waves. Friends asking if I was okay. Coworkers saying they heard things and wanted to check in. Even people I barely knew reaching out with carefully worded curiosity. And then, there were the updates. Apparently, Ethan hadn't gone home quietly after leaving the party. He'd gone straight into damage control mode. Rachel called me mid-morning, her voice half amused, half stunned. "You are not going to believe this," she said. "Try me. He's calling people saying you ambushed him, that the party was a setup, that you manipulated everyone into turning against him." I laughed, before I could stop myself. Of course he was. Because if there's one thing a man like Ethan cannot tolerate, it's a room full of people witnessing him lose control. The irony was almost poetic. For weeks, he had been building a story about me. Emotional, unstable, dangerous to leave privately. Now he was the one spiraling, calling anyone who would answer, trying to rewrite a night too many people had already seen clearly. That was the hook. When someone tells on themselves by over-explaining. By noon, I heard from someone else, then another, then another. He showed up uninvited. He accused you in front of everyone. He looked furious. He didn't deny anything you said. The details varied, but the conclusion didn't. Ethan hadn't exposed me. He had exposed himself. That afternoon I sat on my couch, replaying the confrontation in my mind, not with anxiety but curiosity. Why had he come at all? He didn't need to. He knew he wasn't invited. He knew showing up would look desperate. And yet he came anyway. Because he couldn't stand not being in the room where his story was being decided. That was something I understood now. Ethan didn't just crave control. He feared irrelevance. And walking out of that party without being believed would have made him irrelevant. So he barged in. He accused. He unraveled. And everyone saw it. Rachel stopped by later that evening with leftovers from the party and a grin she couldn't hide. "I think you broke him," she said. I shook my head slowly. "No," I replied. "He broke himself. I just didn't stop him." We sat there scrolling through messages together. Apparently, Tyler had stopped returning Ethan's calls. Josh had told people he didn't want to be involved anymore. Kevin's wife had asked some very uncomfortable questions on the drive home. The social circle that once acted as his shield was quietly stepping away, and that's when it hit me. Ethan didn't lose his reputation because of what I said. He lost it because too many people compared notes. That night at the party wasn't dramatic. It was observational. People watched how he spoke, how he accused, how he refused accountability. And then they watched me. Calm, grounded, uninterested in revenge. The contrast did all the work. The hook deepened when his sister Samantha called me the next day. I hesitated before answering, but something told me to pick up. "I just wanted to say," she began quietly, "I never believed what he said about you." I closed my eyes. "He told people you were difficult," she continued. "Emotional. That he was afraid of how you'd react. But I watched you for 4 years. You were never any of those things. You were accommodating to the point of disappearing." That word landed heavy. Disappearing. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. The fallout was spreading outward in ways Ethan could no longer control, and I felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction. Not revenge. Release. I didn't need to chase closure. Closure was chasing him. That night, another message came through from Ethan. Shorter, sharper. "You didn't have to do this. You enjoyed humiliating me." I stared at it for a moment, then deleted it. Because the truth was simple. I didn't humiliate him. I survived him publicly. And that was unforgivable to someone who needed me broken to feel justified. If you're listening to this and thinking, "Wow, this man really thought he was the main character," go ahead and comment "main character syndrome" below. Or if you've ever watched someone spiral because you stopped reacting, drop a smiley face icon in the comments. Because sometimes the most devastating revenge is staying calm, telling the truth, and letting people connect the dots themselves. And the next part of this story is where life finally moves forward, without him in it. A year after that lunch, I walked into my office early, unlocked the door, and stood there for a moment without turning on the lights. That was the hook, because this room did not exist back when Ethan thought he was ending my life. Sunlight crept in through the windows, catching on the edges of desks. I owned files with my name on them, contracts signed because I chose them, not because I was asked to agree. The silence felt different now, not heavy, not tense, but earned. Exactly 1 year earlier, I had been sitting in a restaurant waiting for a man to finish humiliating me in public. Now, I was standing in a business I built myself. The contrast still stunned me. After the party, things didn't explode dramatically the way people imagine revenge stories should. There were no screaming matches, no public exposés, no viral moments. What happened instead was quieter, and far more permanent. Ethan faded. At first it was subtle. His calls stopped. His messages dried up. Mutual acquaintances spoke his name less often than not at all. People moved on once the truth no longer needed defending. Rachel kept me updated when news crossed her path. Not out of curiosity, but because the ripples were impossible to ignore. Apparently the woman he had been seeing, Alyssa, ended things shortly after learning how carefully he had planned his exit from our relationship. She did not like being the next chapter in a story that involved so much deception. His friends drifted too. Tyler and Josh stopped inviting him out. Kevin and his wife separated months later, and she admitted the party forced her to confront things she had been avoiding for years. Ethan did not implode. He simply shrank. And that mattered more. Because the persona he relied on, admiration, control, plausible innocence, could not survive exposure to calm facts and patient witnesses. As for me, life expanded in ways I had almost forgotten were possible. I left my job at the conference center 6 months after the party, not in a dramatic blaze of defiance but with a clear plan and a signed lease. The event planning business I once postponed because it was too risky became real because I finally trusted my own judgment again. My first clients came through word of mouth. Friends, coworkers, people who had watched me quietly rebuild and decided they wanted someone who understood what it meant to take control of a moment. I was busy. I was tired. I was fulfilled. The relationships I had neglected during my time with Ethan slowly came back into my life. College friends I had stopped calling, family members I had kept at a polite distance, they returned not with judgment but with relief. They told me things gently. "We were worried. We didn't know how to help. We were waiting for you." That word again. Waiting. I learned something important in that year. The people who truly love you do not abandon you when you change. They wait for you to come back to yourself. On the anniversary of the breakup, my mother flew in from Denver. We had dinner together quietly, nothing fancy, nothing symbolic. Halfway through the meal, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You look like yourself again," she said. And for the first time I understood exactly what she meant. I didn't look stronger or harder or untouchable. I looked present. Ethan never contacted me again. Not directly. Not indirectly. The last I heard, he had moved to another city chasing a fresh start where fewer people knew his history. I didn't follow. Because the truth is, I didn't win by watching him lose. I won by no longer needing him to matter at all. Looking back now, I can see how carefully he planned my downfall. The restaurant, the witnesses, the recording, the story he wanted told. What he never planned for was my refusal to perform. That moment when I thanked him, stood up and walked out didn't just end an engagement. It ended a version of myself that thought survival meant compliance. If there is one thing I hope you take from my story, it is this. Sometimes the most powerful response is not anger or revenge or explanation. Sometimes it is dignity, patience, and letting people see clearly. If you stayed with me through this story, if any part of it felt familiar, if you recognized yourself in the moments of shrinking or the moment of waking up, make sure you subscribe to this channel. Because there are more stories like this. Stories about quiet strength, about truth, without shouting, about walking away and building something better. And if you have ever walked out of a room where someone expected you to break only to discover later that you had actually begun, you are not alone. And this is not the end.